Hello, and we are back again with another episode of the Empire of the Cop Insider with Neil Jones. Neil, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad at all. A few interesting questions sort of lined up for you today. It's another familiar name in Romeo Lavia of Southampton. We had Florian Plettenberg report yesterday that there were talks between the player and Liverpool, that those talks were concrete and ongoing. I put that in his words. Is this the case? And if so, how are these talks going between player and club?
Yeah, well, I mean, they are talks ongoing, of course. I mean, that is the situation. The problem is that it almost doesn't matter what the outcome of the talks between the club and the player are at the moment, because there's no agreement with Southampton, and that's where the issue is going to lie with this deal, I think. Potentially, obviously, some deal with or some talks between the player and other clubs, but the real problem that Liverpool face in this deal is the price of the player and the price that Southampton want. The last I heard, which was late last week, was that it's too high. They don't view them as a £50 million investment at this stage. It would be a lot less than that. I think they're not the only club to feel that way. I think Arsenal and Chelsea are pretty much in the same boat. And the question is whether Southampton are willing to lower that price. I mean, you would say, just looking at it logically, where Southampton are, they're in the Championship. They're, less than a month away from starting a Championship season. They've got a new manager in. They've got a player there that's worth, at least probably say 30 million. You would think that they would lower their demands at some point and do a deal. But until that happens, I think the question is, the issue is that there's no deal agreed, and until that is, then any conversations that you have with the player are rather moot. And so that's the stage. There's not been any updates over the weekend. There's not been any developments, as far as I'm aware, in terms of getting closer to a deal or further away from a deal. I think it's still at a bit of an impasse, and we'll have to wait and see whether that changes. I think there is a chance that Southampton will do a deal. I think there is also a chance that Arsenal and Chelsea look to do it as well as Liverpool. So there's still some developments, I think, to come with this one, but none at the moment.
Just to go further on this, Neil, what sense do you get from the club how rigid they are in this approach? Because obviously we've got the City buyback clause that sort of kicks in next summer, looming over our heads, £40 million. That's a £10 million difference. Is it as simple as sort of saying, if Liverpool do some sales, so say Nat Phillips happens to be fine to get his move away, £10 million, maybe you sell a player like Tyler Morton as well. Is it a simple sort of going, well, we've got the difference here. We were prepared to maybe do a deal at 40. We've got the money now. Let's do it at 50. Or is it the case of we won't do a deal at all unless we get it closer to a valuation that we're looking at?
Well, I think it has to make sense. That's the bottom line. It's not a question of sort of having the money. It's whether that investment is. And you're talking about a 19-year-old player with 36 games in his professional career under his belt, who's just been relegated from the Premier League, who was signed for a quarter of that minimum last summer. So you're talking about a huge markup and a huge investment. Of course, the wages probably would be significant, but not huge. They wouldn't break the structure of Liverpool, but it's still, you're talking about a 5-year contract. You're also talking about putting yourself in a position where what do you pay him in relation to the rest of your squad? You put him in as a certain sort of pay grade. If he doesn't kick on, then he's overpriced. If he does kick on, then you need to do a new contract with him pretty swiftly. So there's a lot of things to consider. There are some players, obviously, that Liverpool could offload. And I think more pertinently, really, rather than someone like Phillips or Tyler Morton or those kind of people, I think more pertinently would be what happened with some of the first team players. And if Thiago, for example, was to leave, if Jordan Henderson, there's been links with him. I don't think he will leave, but if he was to leave, I think there'd be a lot more to say go for this deal. I think at the moment, when you're looking at nine first team players who can play in midfield, if you include Alexander-Arnold, I still see the logic. If some people would say do it and get it done, you're getting a 19-year-old player in who's going to be there for many years to come. But at this stage, I think Liverpool's stance is not at that price.
That's fair enough. I mean, again, I suppose it's we run a risk of sort of appearing almost greedy at this stage. We've got the 2 signings in, so I think we can afford for this to rumble on a bit longer in the window. So we'll keep a close eye on that. Moving on sort of briefly to sort of internal matters. I assume you've seen the links already between sort of Luke Chambers and Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen. Is this a deal we could see getting done in the near future? Obviously, it's a player that has a positive relationship with the club. He's transformed them domestically and abroad. And further to that, how do the club see Chambers' future? I think this is one that interests me, obviously, as a left back, because the parameters of what makes a good left back at Liverpool have completely changed. You don't just need to be good bombing up the wings and defensively solid. You need to now be able to tuck in as a left-sided centre-half effectively as part of the back three when we've got possession. Sorry, it's quite a loaded question, but I suppose, do they see him as sort of fulfilling that role in the future?
Well, I mean, I'll start with the Leverkusen links. I mean, it'd be a great move for Luke Chambers, a great move for Liverpool if they can get that done. I believe there is interest there. I'm not sure how close or advanced the interest is, but yeah, they're definitely one of the clubs that have looked, and shows a good scouting network from Bayer Leverkusen, because he's a player that probably not many people know too much about, even in this country. He's just had a spell in Scotland where he did pretty well in a struggling side, but he's a real talent. I mean, I don't like to say these kind of things too sort of proudly, but I do think he's potentially a first team player for Liverpool. I really do. I think he's got that way about him. He's got that style that he's good on the ball, but he's got a bit of steel to him as well. He's really defensively good. He's known in the academy for being probably the best one-on-one defender around. And to carry on to your next part of the question, he's played centre back. He's played there for the under 21s. He's played there for the under 18s. So he certainly has experience of playing in a more narrow defensive role as opposed to being a bombing on fullback. He's actually played in midfield until he was sort of 14, 15. So that explains why he's so comfortable in possession. Set piece taker. He's got delivery from wide. He's a real good attitude on him as well. He's obviously he's very young. He's played 15 games in his pro career. I think around that. He's not yet played for Liverpool's first team. He's still very slight in his build, and will need to improve that. But if you're looking at sort of tools for a potential first team player, and maybe that might be 2 or 3 years down the line, you never know. He's got a lot going for him in that regard. I'd expect him to listen to me. If a deal doesn't get done early, I'd expect him to play a pretty decent part in pre-season and get some chances in the friendly matches. Obviously, there's still a couple of left backs at the club, a couple of senior left backs in Andy Robertson and Costa Tsimikas. But I think Liverpool see a player in Chambers that has, at the very least, a chance of having a future at the club. I think he's actually got a pretty good chance of having a future at the club, but I think it might depend on factors such as how well he does on loan, injury luck, things like that. We've seen a lot of these players come through and look like they're going to be part of the first team furniture, and things don't go their way. He'll need a lot of luck and a lot of development, but the early signs are for a young lad, a teenage left back / centre back. Yeah, he's not in the worst shape.
No, it's always, you're rolling the dice almost with these sort of players. You never know, they can look brilliant. I remember watching Ryan Brewster back in the day and thinking, my God, we've got a player here. And then it just didn't materialise for whatever, myriad reasons. But, that's certainly a very glowing report. And as we have seen with loan spells, you look at players, Harvey Elliott is perhaps the most prominent example of how important a loan spell can be for development. So one to keep an eye on there. Another internal matter I wanted to sort of touch on. It's I don't know if you've sort of seen all the sort of individual sort of player pictures on Instagram, Jordan Henderson boxing, Trent Alexander-Arnold's been going on sort of trench runs and that kind of thing. Joe Gomez is looking rather in shape. Maybe it's my imagination or wishful thinking, but does it seem like these sort of look a bit more ripped and sort of in better shape than they were last year? I don't know whether I would assume there have been conversations behind the scenes with certain players where it's probably, I don't know, perhaps gone along the lines of, you need to up your game a bit here. Otherwise, there might be some, unsavoury consequences sort of down the line.
Yeah, I don't know about the specific of them being more ripped or being in better Instagram nick, if you want to call it that. I think there is definitely been a change in culture with the off season with players in recent years, where maybe in the past, I used to work at the Liverpool Echo, and a colleague of mine, Dave Prentice, used to love doing a story pretty much every year about how pre-seasons changed, and he used to go in the archive of the Echo photographs and put up pictures of Liverpool and Everton players in previous years of pre-season training, and they look like pub players. They had beer guts, and they had sort of, they were clearly having to sort of put through the bin bags and to sweat out some of the alcohol and that kind of thing. That was obviously long gone in modern football or elite football culture. But I do think there is a couple of things at play. I think Instagram's a big part of it, that players are more eager to show off their off-season work, and they maybe have some commercial sort of obligations in that regard to do it. But yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that some of the players that maybe would have been stung by a little bit of the criticism that they had. And I think if you look at the three players you mentioned, they were three of the players who had the most criticism, weren't they? In Joe Gomez, in Trent Alexander-Arnold, Jordan Henderson. It's no surprise to see them looking to come back in the best possible shape. We sort of see it as, you come back for pre-season training and then you get fit. It's not really like that anymore, is it? You come back fit for pre-season training and you get even fitter, and hopefully for all of those players and the rest, really. You could throw in Darwin Nunez in that. I think he looks in pretty decent nick from what I've seen. I'm sure Mo Salah will come back looking $1 million on Tuesday. I think hopefully from all their perspectives, they can stay injury free, but also they can sort of benefit from the work that goes in. I think that the idea that you have a month off now as a footballer in the off season is sort of, I think in the past, I think it's more like a week, 10 days, 2 weeks maximum, and then you're back into work before you even come back for pre-season training. I actually spoke to someone recently about a couple of the academy players, and they said that they've been doing individual training back home, and they've been sort of getting ready to come back in for the academy last Monday. So it's not just a first team thing. I think it's just a football thing that the off season gets shorter and shorter, and it's funny when you sort of hear managers talking about players needing a break, isn't it? When they do have the chance to have a break, they don't take it. So it's probably sort of just a cultural thing mixed with a little bit of the social media sort of window into everything, where we know what players are up to sort of 24/7, don't we?
No, absolutely. I don't know about you, but it's motivating stuff. I want to get back into the gym.
Well, it's or it can be demotivating as well. When you look and think, all that work I put in.
I know.
I talk about Jordan Henderson, when you write about him and you sort of say, he's in the latter stages of his career. Well, he's younger than me, and he's in far better nick. So yeah, maybe he should be a bit more respectful to my elders or youngers.
That's the thing. It's always most on the shoulders that get me.
Muscles on muscles.
Muscles in places that you think wouldn't be muscles. I'm absolutely consumed by jealousy. But One name we discussed in sort of last week's prior chat was that of Chelsea's Levi Colwill. I think it's been made very clear Chelsea obviously absolutely want to keep him. Mauricio Pochettino's kind of said we'll have chats about what he wants and then about what I expect from him. So basically, it's pretty clear at this point the only way Colwill might leave Chelsea is if he states I want to leave. Is there any world in which that happens, and are Liverpool the club to get involved at that stage if he does make it clear he wants an exit?
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs, isn't there? He'd have to make clear that he wants to leave. It'd have to be on a price that is doable for any club. They've already rejected, I think, 35-40 million from Brighton, so you're going north of that for a start. But yeah, Liverpool would certainly want to be in any conversation that's had over a player like Colwill. He had a great summer, didn't he, with the under-21s tournament, alongside obviously a couple of Liverpool lads. And I think everyone got a bit excited by Harvey Elliott's comment under one of his Instagram posts. Got a dog there, by the way, just trying to get into the shot. he must have some updates for us. But yeah, Colwill clearly is a player that a lot of clubs would love to get out of Chelsea, and I think Pochettino is obviously going to make a big play to keep him. He's got some injuries. Obviously, Badiashile got an injury at the back end of last season and is probably going to miss the start. They've obviously got some players who've left the club, older players. So there is the potential for Chelsea to go down a different direction and put in some of the younger players. Obviously, there's not just him. There's Hall, Lewis Hall. Obviously, they've still got Reece James and players like that who've come through. So there is that possibility that they make him a central part. And if they do, then I think that's all bets are off in terms of a departure. But if there is, the conversation is, look, you're fourth or fifth choice and he's not happy with that, I'm not going to sign a new contract, I want to leave, then yeah, Liverpool would love to be in that conversation. The question is obviously, what price is it going to be? Chelsea have shown this summer, haven't they, with Mason Mount, that they're willing to hold out and not sell at the first sign of trouble. I think they'd be even more resolved to keep someone like Colwill, because you don't get many players like him. You don't get many left-footed centre-backs. You don't get many who come through your academy. And yeah, his star is very much on the rise at the moment, isn't it? So, it'd be a great deal for Liverpool to do, but I think it'll be a very difficult one.
You have to bear with me on this one. I mean, it's obviously very clear at this point what Liverpool need. How do Liverpool ultimately look to distribute the funds this summer? And, I think this is very borderline teenager playing Football Manager. But I mean, it's very clear in my mind, you bring in that sort of quality third midfielder, you bring in the quality sort of centre half. You're probably not going to need to do much in the way of business, maybe for the next 2, 3, 4, transfer window. I know obviously there will be more work, more surgery needed to do for the back line and that kind of thing. But if you look at, the profile of the midfield, profile of the forward line, is there any way the kind of club look at this and go, pushing all our business sort of front facing here in this sort of summer window, or most of that business anyway, or do they kind of, is it just that rigid kind of approach of, no, it has to be sort of for the right price, we're not going to be drawn into this like protracted battle to maybe sign Colwill for 60, 70 million?
Yeah. Oh, well, I admire your optimism that Liverpool wouldn't have to do any more business in the next 2, 3 or 4 transfer windows. I mean, I'd like to read the comments when that sort of transfer window gets underway, and you obviously, we've seen in the last couple of years, haven't we, that things can change very quickly. I mean, would you have said last summer that Liverpool would need a centre back, because there's doubts over Van Dijk? Would you have said that Thiago might, move on, and Fabinho and people like that? Maybe, but you show how quickly it can change. You can imagine a world in a year's time when Mo Salah's contract's into its last year, maybe Diogo Jota or Darwin Nunez or Cody Gakpo haven't quite kicked on, and people say, well, actually, we need to go and buy a new forward. Andy Robertson's looking the wrong side of 30 now, so we need to get a left back. Trent's only got 2 years left on his contract, so there's a lot of things going on that can change. I don't think Liverpool can fix all their problems this summer, regardless of what they do, really. So that's an ongoing thing. You've got to remember, Liverpool are in the Champions League. They would be gambling if they were to do, if they were to sort of say, let's just push the boat out. You're gambling that you're going to get back in the Champions League, and if you don't, then you could be leaving yourself in a big problem. So I don't think it's as simple as Liverpool just saying, we can do it all in one hit. I think even if they were to sign Lavia and Colwill, there's no guarantee that they can challenge for the title. There's no guarantee that they could even get in the top 4. It would make it a lot easier in both cases, but I don't think you're talking about sort of guaranteeing success or fixing issues. I think issues are ongoing always at football clubs, and there's always squad planning that needs to take place. Liverpool have shown in the past, and it won't go down well with people, but they do work on a budget. They don't have unlimited funds. They don't throw the kitchen sink at every transfer. They do it with a methodical approach and try and budget things off and make sure that the numbers make sense. That's why at the end of the day, that's why McAllister and Szoboszlai did make sense, because there was a certain price, there was a certain wage structure, and they were deemed well within that, as well as the players who were leaving had freed up the space. So I think it would depend on things other than Liverpool thinking that they could make their team perfect or make their squad perfect. That doesn't exist, unfortunately. Even what was it? Were we talking? I think I remember talking back end of the 2021-22 season. I remember talking about Liverpool leaving players out of their squad, great players, players like Joe Gomez, players like Harvey Elliott, Curtis Jones, couldn't get in the squad. And we were talking about, did Liverpool have the strongest squad ever? 15 months on, whatever it is, we're now talking about Liverpool needing 5 or 6 new signings. So that's how quickly the world can change. I don't think we're going to have quiet transfer windows going forward.
Yes, I think perhaps over-optimistic on my part. I mean, it's a fair point. I think the circumstances do change quickly, and obviously when you've got things on the horizon, like potentially finding your Salah successor, which is going to be far from easy. There's a lot to do. I suppose from my point of view, it's how much can you get done realistically this summer, to the extent where when you are faced with those dilemmas, it's not a case of going, because this summer has been very much right. We're effectively doing the work we kind of should have done gradually over the last 3 or 4 years or so. Obviously, there have been mitigating factors, the pandemic, like Champions League football now. So I understand where we are. I guess it's a point of frustration. Well, I mean, we're in silly territory here.
Just to carry on. Sorry, I mean, you're right. They've tried to do it. They've done it pretty successfully, you'd think, with the forward line. Really, they've managed to refresh that almost unnoticed, haven't they? Bringing in players before players left. They haven't necessarily been able to do it. Well, they haven't been able to do it at all with the midfield, have they? They left themselves in a terrible position. They tried to do it. Obviously, they expected Joe Gomez to move into a position, but Konate came in, pretty much too late. But he was, he stepped into the shoes of Dejan Lovren, didn't he? But I think it's difficult to do it. Probably more difficult to do it centre back or goalkeeper, for example, because you can't guarantee players games. You can with a midfielder, you can with a forward. You can say, look, if you don't start, you're coming on, or you start 1 in 3. So you could buy Lily Colwill for £50 million. He doesn't go straight into the team, and in a year's time, he hasn't played that much football, and he hasn't actually got to the level that you thought he was going to get to, because he's not playing. So and you haven't kept him happy either. He's leaving Chelsea because he wants to play, and he's coming to you and he's not playing. So I think that it's not. It's the ideal scenario is that you go and buy these players and you have your squad that looks brilliant and it looks perfect on paper, but it brings with it its own issues as well. So there are a lot of other things to consider around buying squad players and strengthening your squad. It isn't quite as easy as it is and has been. And if you look at the past with Liverpool, the squad players that they've had who've been able to come in, people like Origi, Shaqiri, people like that, younger players maybe who've come, James Milner, obviously someone with that perfect sort of attitude and versatility, but also someone who was well into the latter years of their career. They've been the players that have been successful as squad players, whereas other players maybe were brought in as big signings, and people like that, Naby Keita and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, maybe haven't been able to be quite as successful because there's been different demands on them, there's been different expectations on them, there's been a need for them to try and retain value, which they were unable to do. They've had injuries, so it's fraught with difficulty building a successful squad. I think that's why you have to take your hat off, I think, to Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. He's been able to do it, obviously on different financial parameters, but he's done it so successfully by keeping players happy and making sure that whatever team he has on the pitch almost feels like a first choice 11, doesn't it, when City pick it, whether it's Grealish or Mahrez or Gundogan or whoever it's been in the past, it always feels like a strong side. Liverpool aren't at that level yet. That's the dream, but it's going to be difficult to get there, I think.
I think you have to credit Guardiola's sort of ruthlessness as well. I think when everyone sort of thought, oh my God, he's getting rid of João Cancelo, that's absolutely ludicrous. He's one of the world's best fullbacks, but City have reached fresh heights, the treble. You have to give credit where credit's due. Neil, I'm going to up the silliness meter even further. There have been reports of Liverpool's interest in Federico Valverde. I think one report actually went as far as to say that Liverpool are gearing up to sign the player. I would assume absolute tosh. But is there anything in this at all, even if it is even just vague appreciation, similarly to Aurelien Tchouameni?
If they don't appreciate him, then they're not doing their job properly, are they, Liverpool? I don't think there's any chance Liverpool are going to sign Federico Valverde unless something massive was to happen in terms of 5 or 6 players leaving the club for 200 million. He's obviously a brilliant player, isn't he? He's been huge for Real Madrid. Actually, I think he was probably their best player in the Champions League final against Liverpool. He was probably one of their key players in that run to the final. Younger, obviously, than the players that he's coming in to compete with. very much, I think, seen as part of the future. I'd be amazed if Real Madrid were looking to let him go at this stage, like Tchouaméni, like we're saying, like Camavinga, like, you know, the younger lads who play in the forward areas in Vinicius and Rodrigo. So I think Real Madrid are building a future that involves Valverde. I think at sort of price, it was sort of about £70 million, I think, wasn't it? Even that feels on the light side, to be perfectly honest, for a player like him who plays a couple of positions at a very high level. Great experience, you know, real top player. So it'd be a nice one to dream about from a Liverpool perspective. And I think if you offered Liverpool the chance, if you said Federico Valverde's out of work and he fancies playing for you, I think Liverpool would jump at it. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think the deal will either.
Well, we can always dream. I mean, I feel like I've not really given the impression that I'm relaxed about the transfer window of my Football Manager comments, but I would say I'm mostly quite relaxed at this stage.
I think, you know what? I think I honestly, I think Tuesday, you know, when McAllister and Szoboszlai are Kirby tomorrow, I think people will start to, I wouldn't say relax, but I think it will sort of hit home. Right, Liverpool have done, you know, they've done 2 good pieces of business there potentially, and obviously we've got the friendlies coming up. What ends that, you know, 10 days time or so. I think that will start to sort of not change people's views, but soften people's views. It would just be nice, I think, if Liverpool were to get one more at least through the door in the first team. I'm torn between whether it should be a midfield player because of just what's happened in the past, or whether it should be a defender. I think the issue is probably going to be bigger going forward in defence in 12 months' time. That's where I see the bigger issues. But I think there's still work to be done from a Liverpool point of view. I don't get the impression from speaking to people around the club that that's them done. Usually, you get that message gets out quite early in the sense of, no, we're done now. That's, you know, we've done all our business. I think there's still some work to be done.
No, that's encouraging. I mean, I think with you on the back line, I'm a little bit concerned. I know we're technically stocked for sort of right centre halves, but all injury prone, aren't they? And you kind of think, you know, what are we doing about Virgil, lads? So stuff to do there as far as I'm concerned. What I wanted to actually talk about really would be sort of risk taking in the market. It was something Jurgen talked about after the prior summer window. He sort of said, you know, it'd be nice if we could take some more risks in the transfer market every now and then, being the operative sort of term. Is there any stage in this window where Liverpool would be inclined to take risks? Have there been any talks about risk? I mean, I think a lot of the signings, both the signings so far, have been very sensible. You know, release clauses, you can see exactly where they fit into the squad. I think there's very little doubt, certainly about McAllister, in terms of how good of a fit they'll be at the club. But could you see any sort of risks, any sort of curveballs being thrown potentially with either the third midfielder or the centre half?
Well, I don't agree. I think the 2 signings, I think McAllister was obviously sensible, made sense in every sense. I think if you said 60 million for Dominic Szoboszlai at the start of the summer, I think that you'd say that's a risk. You know, in terms of, you know, I don't think many clubs would have paid it. No other club was willing to pay it. So I think that might fit into what Klopp was saying, is that, look, there's a player there for 60 million. You might value him at 40, but just pay his release clause and we'll get it done. I think that fits more into what Klopp was saying. I think he was sort of saying, instead of having this sort of set way and, oh no, we're not going to go any higher than that. You know, sometimes there's a deal to be done and just do it. And Liverpool have done it with Szoboszlai. I mean, he's a good player. He's what is he? I think he's either 3rd highest sign or 4th highest sign in Liverpool's history.
Yeah, I think he's 3rd. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be Van Dijk, Alisson, Darwin. Maybe ahead of him. Yeah. So I mean, that ties in. I think the question now is, if another deal like that presents itself. You know, let's say you're 5 million away from what you want for Lavia. You know, Liverpool think he's worth 30, Southampton want 35. Would Liverpool just say, go for it? Come on, let's just do it. You know, it's what harm can it do, or someone else? I think that would where it comes in. I think Liverpool have done some really good business. Like I say, they've addressed an issue in their squad, which was, you know, clearly that they had midfielders they couldn't rely on, attacking midfielders they couldn't rely on. There's still some gaps, I think, in the squad. They've lost some players that contributed a lot for them. They've lost 2 players in Firmino and Milner that played more for Jurgen Klopp than anyone else. So you'd expect that somewhere along the next few weeks, Liverpool would look to add another player into their squad. I think that could play regular football. I think that there is the potential there that they might be a bit more willing to push the button a little bit quicker or a little bit sort of more decisively than they have in recent years. I don't expect that it'll get late in the window and Liverpool are sort of scratching around for Arthur Melo and that kind of thing. But in terms of risk taking, I think they've already shown that it might not be seen as the biggest risk in the world, but in terms of sort of being decisive and saying, you know what, we want this play and we're going to get it done, I think they've shown with Szoboszlai that they're willing to do it.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I take your point with Szoboszlai. I think obviously the 16. I think there probably were other factors we need to sort of consider as well. I think everyone was sort of focused on sort of alternative targets. I know you've certainly looked at sort of Manchester United with Mason Mount. I think City seem to have their hands full with Justin Gvardiol at the moment as well. So, I mean, perhaps it's certainly the case if they'd sort of moved on from those signings, you still would have gone, well, actually, we don't really need it. But I think we'll have to see. I'm very excited about Szoboszlai, seeing what he can contribute in English football. Yeah.
I think he's going to be a good player. I think he's an exciting one to watch in pre-season, definitely, isn't he? Just where he fits in and what type of player he is.
He can do so much. I mean, I know we talked about this again sort of last week, but there is so much. I mean, there's so much you can do with all of them. I suppose that's the beauty. I mean, we know Klopp wanted, right, let's get someone who can play ideally 6, 8 and 10. He's probably more your 8 and your 10. I know I've seen his defensive games improved, but I mean, you never really know. Like we go to the Gini Wijnaldum example every week, but you know what I mean? You almost can't predict what they're going to do with them, because if they see something they like in some other area, they'll just do whatever they want, which is absolutely, what we want to see anyway. I want to sort of talk internally about sort of what's going on with potential exits. We've seen reports, of course, about Thiago and alleged talks with Galatasaray. Is this the case? Has anyone sort of expressed interest in the player? Again, he sort of looks, I would say Fabinho and Henderson are not untouchable, but sort of the most unlikely to leave at this stage. Whereas, I think everyone sort of seems to agree Thiago is probably the one that would be sold if he was open to a move and the offer was decent. Yeah,
I think so. And we said that on last week's show, didn't we? That he looked the most saleable out of Liverpool's midfielders, if you like. There's nothing been expressed to the club in terms of offers, so that's the first thing to say. They haven't rejected an offer, or they're not considering an offer from anywhere, Saudi Arabia or Turkey. I mean, Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, I think are both interested in the player or like the player. There was a story obviously last week, I think from David Ornstein, wasn't it, that Thiago turned down an offer from Saudi Arabia early in the summer, and that he was at this stage intent on staying at Liverpool. I mean, he was back on Saturday. I don't know if you saw it, but he was back at Kirby on Saturday with the squad. Didn't seem to train, wasn't in training gear. He had his jeans on. There wasn't sort of any pictures of him doing his pre-season testing or anything like that. So either he's still injured, which he had an injury at the back end of last season with his hip, and he's not close to returning, or there might be something else going on. I think he was at the British Grand Prix as well yesterday. So there's I think there's potential for Thiago to leave. I do. I think there's an issue there. Well, not an issue. There's a situation bubbling there that could come to a head if a good offer was to be received. The question is obviously whether that offer is to be received and when. You're right. I think Fabinho's untouchable. Certainly, I think Jordan Henderson, to me, it logically feels untouchable, but there's a lot of stories around him and Saudi Arabia, isn't it? Just bubbling away at the moment as well. And until sort of you get a definitive answer there from the player or from the club, then it's hard to completely rule that kind of thing out. What I'd say is Henderson, as you say, in decent shape and expected back at Kirby on Tuesday with the rest of the rest of the international contingent to Liverpool. He's expected back. So I think if you're looking at sort of those three, I'd say you'd be putting, the amber would be Henderson, the green would be Thiago, and the red would be Fabinho.
Nice stuff. Just lastly, I want to kind of touch on Curtis Jones. He's had a terrific postseason, won the under-21 Euros with the England side, back-to-back man of the match awards, I believe, in the semi-finals and the final. I'm curious, either whether this is your opinion or if there has sort of been any sort of internal talks behind the scenes at the club, where they sort of see Curtis playing next season. I mean, he thrived in that sort of left central sort of midfield role, but I mean, he is capable of playing sort of deeper, as a 6. Would there be any way they could potentially see him as filling that sort of like double pivot role alongside Fabinho, or do they sort of feel more confident that no, you're going to be a sort of our sort of option in that sort of left central midfield role, competing with Thiago, competing with Alexis McAllister?
I think more likely the latter. But he's played there very briefly, hasn't he? He played Nottingham Forest, I think, last season. He sort of played in a 2 with Fabinho, and it was his first start of the season. Came out of nowhere really, and I think it was a bit unexpected. But he was as good as anyone really on the pitch in a pretty bad performance. I think one thing that's really impressed about Curtis, and should surely be impressing the manager and his staff, is just the maturity and the sort of the level of consistency that he's reached in the last sort of 3 or 4 months. I mean, I actually think he showed that the year before as well. He's obviously in the midst of it all. He's had injury, which has really taken away from his opportunities and the amount of games he's been able to play. But I do think you're looking at sort of Curtis for maybe 2 seasons. That's been pretty good and pretty. When he's played, has been at a consistent level. He's played, keeps the ball well. He's physically robust and seems to understand the game tactically a lot better than he did when he was a young kid coming through, understandably so. He showed at the back end of last season that he's got goals in. I mean, he nearly scored in the final, didn't he? Well, he did score in the final rather fortuitously. He nearly got another goal, breaking from midfield, shooting on his left foot, and that's great to see. I think people have been dying to see him do a little bit more of that for Liverpool. Showed at the back end of last season at Tottenham and Leicester games that he can get goals from arriving into the penalty area in time, and his arrival well. So I still see him as playing a bit further forward than he does deeper. You have to remember it's still an under-21s tournament. He's still playing against sort of not fully developed opponents and teams. So it's a different sort of ask to play number 6 in that kind of tournament than it is to playing in the Premier League. But I think he's shown definitely good signs for club and country in the last 3-4 months that he's back, he's fit, and he's capable of playing at a very good level. And I think he's still going to be a very big part of Liverpool squad next season. He might have his work cut out initially. He's obviously the knock-on effect from this Euros is that he comes back a bit later than everyone else, and he could find himself, having to play catch up a little bit with McAllister and Szoboszlai in the door, and Trent Alexander-Arnold possibly moving into midfield and other things going on. But I think he's definitely in a position where hopefully his injury problems are behind him and he's ready to make a big contribution to Liverpool. You have to remember he's still so young. He's still 22, homegrown, played nearly 100 games now for Liverpool. You want to see him sort of carry on taking those steps, and I think he is capable of becoming a really good player for Liverpool.
Plenty to look forward to there, of course. We've had Neil Jones of Covering Liverpool. You can go give his column a look on the Substack platform, I believe. And of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Neil Jones Goal. Plenty to look forward to too from a Liverpool perspective. We've got the 2 new lads coming in soon. I think it'll be interesting. I think we sort of touched on this earlier, didn't we? Sort of about the tangibility there. I think once we see them actually sort of physically in training, we might go, actually, you know what, Liverpool actually have done quite well so far in this window. Yeah. We'll have to see, of course. You can't keep everyone happy online. We know what Twitter's like, which is what Threads is there for. But yes, you've been watching this. You've been watching this on YouTube. Be sure to give us a like, a comment, and a subscribe, and be sure to do the same for our own Substack at Empire of the Cop Insider. I've been your host, Farrell Keeling. We've had the lovely Neil Jones. Take care.